that actions are not part of Iman. There were extreme ones amongst them, and they said that basically whoever says he's a believer, he's complete in Iman. He's complete in Iman. And that sins don't harm him at all. As long as he says he's a believer, and sins don't harm him alongside that Iman. The same way they said that good deeds does not benefit alongside kufr, then sins do not harm alongside Iman. Now this, Shaykh Abdul Muhsin Abbadi mentioned from the most falsest of statements, and rather it is kufr to believe this. Another group of the Murji'ah, they came, and they were lesser of evil. They said that actions don't enter into the definition of Iman, although they opposed the first group, and they said that the sinner, the one who commits sins, will be held accountable. He'll be held accountable, and he shouldn't commit sins, but it's not part of Iman. Actions are not part of Iman. What did this group do? This group is the reason for why many Muslims today, they don't do good deeds. If you're to say to him, do a good deed, he says, my heart is clean. My Iman is there. I have Iman, my heart is clean, I don't have to do good deeds. So this statement of theirs in reality, and we'll come in more detail later, led the people to the widespread of sins and indecency. Because if a person believes that sins don't harm his Iman, and as long as he's a believer, he's complete in his Iman, he doesn't care if he commits sins. His Iman is still complete. Until some of them believe that the sinner, his Iman is like the Iman of Jibreel alayhi salatu wasalam, or that his Iman is like the Iman of Abu Bakr as-Siddiq, even though he's a sinner. Showing us the repulsiveness of this statement. But Ahlul Sunnah, they said that actions are part of Iman. That actions are part of Iman, the same way statements and belief in the heart are part of Iman. And they said that Iman increases and it decreases. How does it increase? With acts of obedience, and it decreases with the opposite, which is acts of disobedience and sins. The evidence for that is much in the Quran. Allah says, إِنَّمَا الْمُؤْمِنُونَ الَّذِينَ إِذَا ذُكِرَ اللَّهُ وَجِلَتْ قُلُوبُهُمْ وَإِذَا تُلِيَتْ عَلَيْهِمْ آيَاتُهُ زَادَتْهُمْ إِيمَانًا. That the believer is the one when Allah is remembered, his heart trembles, and when the verse of Allah recited upon him, what happens to him? His Iman, it increases. Also Allah says, فَأَمَّا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا فَزَادَتْهُمْ إِيمَانًا. As for those who believe, their Iman increases. Allah also says in the Quran, هُوَ الَّذِي أَنزَلَ السَّكِينَةَ فِي قُلُوبِ الْمُؤْمِنِينَ لِيَزْدَادُوا إِيمَانًا مَعَ إِيمَانِهِمْ. That Allah sends tranquility upon the believers so that their Iman increases with the Iman that they already have. Also in the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, that many of the scholars in the Salaf, they used to use this hadith as evidence that Iman increases. The Prophet said, أَكْمَلُ الْمُؤْمِنِينَ إِيمَانًا أَحْسَنُهُمْ خُلُقًا. The most complete of the believers in Iman is who? The one who has the best manners. Is the one who has the best manners. Hadith Abu Hurairah radiallahu anhu. Now they say anything that increases also decreases. But do we have an evidence that Iman decreases? Yes. The Prophet ﷺ said in the hadith of Abu Zayd Al-Qayrawani, مَنْ رَأَى مِنْكُمْ مُنْكَرًا فَلْيُغَيِّرُ بِيَدِهِ فَإِنْ لَمْ يَسْتَطِعْ فَبِلِسَانِهِ وَإِنْ لَمْ يَسْتَطِعْ فَبِقَلْبِهِ وَذَلِكَ أَضْعَفُ الْإِيمَانِ. That whoever is able to remove an evil, then let him do so with his hand. If he's not able to remove it with his hand, he removes it with his tongue. If he's not able to even do that, then let him hate it in his heart, and that is the weakest form of Iman. Also from the greatest evidences that Iman decreases is that it causes narration of intercession that the one who has in his heart a mustard seed of Iman will be taken out the fire. A mustard seed of Iman will be taken out the fire. What does that show? That Iman fluctuates. Some people their Iman is higher, and some people their Iman is lower. Also from the greatest evidences the scholars they mention is what we mentioned last week. The Sirat. The Sirat, not everyone will pass the Sirat based on one description or one speed. Some people will crawl, some people will walk, some people will be fast, like some people has like the blink of an eye. That fluctuation of the speed and the action shows that some people's Iman is high and some people's Iman is low. So it shows this one's Iman is higher and this one Iman is weaker and lower. This one has an increase in Iman and this one has a decrease in Iman. Al-Hafiz Ibn Hajar said in Al-Fath that Al-Lalika'i, he relayed with an authentic chain from Al-Bukhari, Imam Al-Bukhari, that he said, I met more than 1,000 men from the scholars in different lands. And I did not see anyone amongst them differing regarding that Iman is statements and actions, and it increases and it decreases. All of the scholars that Imam Bukhari met, the scholars from the time of Sufyan al-Thawri, Sufyan ibn Uyayna, all those Imams, Abu Hatim al-Razi, Abu Hatim and Abu Zur'a al-Razi, and all those scholars were books in Aqidah, ibn Abi Zayd, and all of them, Imam Ahmed, when they wrote their books of Aqidah, they included this in the chapter of Aqidah, that Iman is statements and actions and belief in the heart, and it increases and it decreases. Now, when it comes to this affair of Iman increasing and decreasing, some people, they oppose Ahlul Sunnah in this. The main groups that oppose Ahlul Sunnah in this were the Murji'ah, those who say that actions are not part of Iman, and the Khawarij, those who say from their statements is that the one who commits a major sin is a kafir. And we're going to come to know where they got this from. Now, the Murji'ah and the Khawarij, they differed in the definition of Iman. The Khawarij, for example, they say Iman is statements, actions, and belief in the heart. But they say it does not increase and it does not decrease. So they agree with the first 3 points, and the last 2 points they don't agree with. And it's important to understand this before we get to the discussion regarding them. The Murji'ah, they broke off into 4 groups. For example, one of their groups, they said Iman is ma'rifah. Iman is ma'rifah, just to know. Just to know Allah. As long as you know Allah, you're a complete believer. With this definition, who else enters into Iman? Iblis, alayhi la'natullah. Iblis, did he know Allah? Did he know Allah? He knew Allah. But he didn't believe. Allah described him as a kafir in the Quran. But according to the definition, Jahm bin Safwan, that he was a believer. Another group they came called the Karramiyah. The Karramiyah, they said that Iman is statement on the tongue. That's it, statement on the tongue. Also they have the tafasil, but statement on the tongue. With this definition of the Karramiyah, who enters into it? The Munafiqeen. Because the Munafiqeen يشهدون إن أنك إذا جاءك المنافقون قالوا إنك لرسول الله والله يشهد إن المنافقين, the ayah in Surah Munafiqun, that they bore witness to the Risala Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, but Allah said they are liars. So the Munafiqun, based on this definition, enter into Iman. A'udhu billah. Another group, they came and they said Iman is tasdeeq. Iman is just affirmation of the heart. An affirmation of the heart. From the Asha'ira and the Maturidiyya, and them, they believe this. And then the 4th group, they came, who are known as Murji'atul Fuqaha, the scholars of jurisprudence and the Murji'ah. They believe that Iman is statement on the tongue and belief in the heart. And that actions are not part of Iman. That although they're sought, they should be done, but they're not part of Iman. So that's that group. Those are the 2 groups that oppose. But both of those 2 groups, they believe that Iman does not increase and it does not decrease. Shaykh al-Islam ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah, he says that the reason all of them, from the Murji'ah and their categories, fell into this is the same reason why the Khawarij and the Mu'tazila fell into this thinking, is because they believe that Iman does not increase or decrease, rather it is one thing. Rather it is one thing. Pay attention to this point. That they said Iman is one thing. You cannot have some. You have to have either have it or you don't have it. They say Iman is haqiqatu murakkabah. They say Iman is a compound reality. So for example, they said if you were to have 10 riyal or $10, for example, let's say $10, and you take $2 out of that $10, do you have $10? How much you have now? You have $8. The reality of $10 is gone. This is where they came from. So they said that Iman is a haqiqatu murakkaba. It is a reality which is compound. Either you have it or you don't have it. Now this in reality is something that opposes the evidences of the Quran and Sunnah. And we'll come to know, inshallah, the reality of this statement and what it entails from both sides. From both sides, what this statement entails. So they both agree that Iman doesn't increase and it doesn't decrease. And they said Iman is one thing. So the Murji'ah, they'll say, if you have Iman, you're completing your iman. You're completing your iman. Any sin you fall into, you're completing your iman. Doesn't matter. And the Khawarij just say, if you fell into a kabira, or some of them even say any sin, what happens? You lost all of your iman. You lost all of your iman. Now the scholars, they mention that the first khilaf which occurred in this ummah was regarding this affair. The first khilaf that occurred in this ummah was regarding this subject of iman. Whereas the first to come out were the Khawarij. And they opposed the Sahaba radiallahu anhum. Whereas they started kicking out the believers, the believing sinners, from Islam in totality. They started declaring them as kuffar. And the outcome of that declaration was that their blood is halal. And what else? Their wealth is halal. And they're no longer Muslim. And in the hereafter, that if they die in the hereafter, they'll be from those who are in hellfire forever. For that reason, the Prophet ﷺ, regarding this specific group, the Khawarij, he commanded us with fighting them. He commanded us to fight them. And he warned from them. And he called them the dogs of the hellfire. And he called them the dogs of the hellfire. And he described them as Hudatha'u al-Asnan, Sufaha'u al-Ahlam. That they are young in age and they are foolish. And they are foolish. And he warned against them, alayhi salatu wasalam. And that although they may do a lot of ibadah, that ibadah doesn't benefit them. تَحْكِرُونَ صَلَاتُكُمْ إِنَّ صَلَاتِهِمْ وَقِرَاءَتُكُمْ إِنَّ قِرَاءَتِهِمْ. You look the Sahaba, the Prophet's Sahaba, you look down regarding your recitation with their recitation and your salat with their salat. But yet it didn't benefit them. لَا يُجَاوِزُ حَنَاقِرَهُمْ. It doesn't pass their throats. They don't benefit by way of the Quran. So the Khawarij, they believe that Iman, what do the Khawarij believe regarding Iman? What do they believe again? Statements, actions, and belief in the heart. But they didn't believe in increase and decrease. What happened when they didn't believe in increase and decrease? They said if you fell into a sin, what happens? You lost all of your Iman. Now think about it. The reality of many in the Muslim countries that are trialed with the trial of the Khawarij, where do they get that these Muslims are kuffar and their blood is halal and their wealth is halal and they get killed? From this aqidah, from this belief. Once they believe that this person has lost the title of being a Muslim, now their blood and wealth is halal. Whatever they do in that country of killing innocent Muslims, this is where they got it from. This is where the result of that belief, that false belief that they had, that Iman is one thing. You fall into a sin, you lost all of your Iman. Now the title of this Muslim has changed to a kafir. What happens now? His blood is halal, his wealth is halal, his honor is halal, and the results are well known in society today. And the Muslim countries, all they're trialed by way of this trial and tribulation of the Khawarij. The second group, what happened was when this group, this ideology spread, a second group came about to oppose this ideology. And they fell into a mistake which was greater than this mistake. For that reason, the scholars, they say that the way of the Ahlul Irja is worse than, is from the worst innovations that occurred to Islam. And they said that nothing is more harmful and feared upon Islam than the way of Ahlul Irja. And that's because they believe that the sinner, his Iman is like that of Jibreel alayhi salam, like Abu Bakr radiallahu anh, and the righteous. And some of them, like we mentioned, they said Iman is just to know. And for them, Iblis is even a believer. And by way of this, it puts out the Sharia. There's no Amr bil Ma'ruf, no Nahy anil Munkar, because everyone's completing Iman. You can't command this one with good. You can't say to this one, stay away from haram. Because what is his reply? I have Iman. I'm completing Iman. You can't say to one, this one is a sin. Do this act of worship, stay away from this sin, because my heart is clean. I have Iman and my heart is clean. By way of this, it takes away the legislation of Islam. By way of this, the extremists amongst them, by way of it, the Amr Ma'ruf and Nahy Munkar, the action of Islam are taken away, because action is not part of Iman. As long as you have belief in your heart, or you know, or you say upon your tongue, you're a full believer. And this in reality takes away a lot of the legislations of Islam. For that reason, it's more harmful and more feared than other innovations. Because one who believes this will not do any actions. He won't pray the salah. Why does he have to pray the salah? He's completing his Iman. His Iman is like that, Jibreel alayhi salam. A'udhu billah. So based on this, these two ideologies became widespread. And you find the extremists of the Khawarij, based on their belief, they considered the Muslims to be kuffar. And by way of that, what followed that was that their blood and their honor and their money is all halal. And they started to kill innocent Muslims, and this is where they got it from. Because the iman with them is one thing. Either you have it or you don't have it. Once you've committed that sin, you've lost the title of iman in Islam. Now you're what? You're a kafir to them. The second group, the murji'ah, whether you pray, you don't pray, you do good deeds, you don't do good deeds. Although we're not talking murji'ah to fuqaha right now, talk about the extreme ones amongst them, because murji'ah to fuqaha will say that yes, you still do good deeds and you still stay away from haram and the benefits and like this, but it's not part of iman. But the reality of the situation is that it led to this way of these people that they became open sinners and said sins don't affect my iman. And the actions are not needed for me to be saved in the hereafter. And they'll say statements like, example, you see them if they're salat time, when you tell the individual, get up and pray, what is he going to say to you? I've heard it before, and maybe some of you heard it as well. They say, my heart is clean. ألا إن في الجسد مضغة إذا صلحت صلح الجسد كله وإذا فسدت فسد الجسد كله ألا وهي القلب. The Prophet ﷺ, he said, in the body there is a flesh. If it is upright, the body becomes upright. And if it is corrupt, the body becomes corrupt. This is the reply to them. Because the corruption is in your heart, the body and the limbs are corrupt as well. That's why you don't pray the salah. But just showing you the evilness of this statement of theirs. And then came a third group who claim that they're intellectual and they're smart. Until today, they still claim to be intellectual and smart. Although you'll find their statements, the uqala, those who truly have intellect, will find that their statements are from the funniest statements you may find. They said, and these are people that used to sit with Hassan al-Basri, and they left his sitting, Amr ibn Ubayd and Wasil ibn Ata. They left the sitting of Al-Hassan al-Basri, and they did i'tazala. They basically left the majlis, and they were called mu'tazila, because they left the sitting of Hassan al-Basri. They came with their intellect and they said that the one who commits a major sin in this dunya is fi manzila bayna manzilatayn. He's in a position between two positions. What does that mean? Their intellect fooled them, and they said that this person who committed a major sin in this dunya is not a Muslim and he's not a kafir. He's somewhere in between the two, we don't know what he is. Anyone who thinks about this will see this is a fool who said this, but yet they still think they're intellectual individuals. But they agreed with the Khawarij that if he dies like this, in the hereafter, he's in the hellfire forever. So they differ with the Khawarij in one point, but they agreed with them in a different point. And this is important to understand. Some of us, we sit in this masjid, for example, and we may not have heard some of the statements of the people of innovation, or some of the people that actually believe these things. Once you actually believe or hear these things from these people and what they believe, you see the reality of the importance of studying this chapter. If you go example in my country, Afghanistan, you see with some of the Afghanis, you'll find some of them are extreme Khawarij. You sit with them, they say, if you commit this sin, you're a kafir, you're out of Islam. And you sit with another group amongst them, you commit whatever sin you want, your iman is complete. You won't know the reality of this bab, this chapter, until you actually sit with people like that and see how far misguided they are and the misguidance that they believe. You make a statement, you're munafiq, you're a kafir, you're out of Islam. You did this, you're a kafir, that's it. This chapter, the importance of it is that the scholars they mention is al-asma wal-ahkam. They mention the chapter al-asma wal-ahkam. What does it mean? The title and the rulings that pertain to that title. The title now, if it changes based on your belief, now it has ahkam. It has rulings. What does that mean? If you believe that this person is complete in his iman, and he commits major sins, and he commits maybe even kufr, and you still believe he's complete in his iman because action are part of iman, you give him a title. Now what is the title you give him? That he's a complete believer. What's the ahkam that follows that? That he cannot make a mistake, and he's going to be in the Jannah forever. And no way he's going to be punished or any kind of punishment hereafter. The other group, they gave you a title. You fell into a major sin, your title changed from Muslim to what? To kafir. What follows that is ahkam. In this dunya, your blood is halal, your ird, your honor is halal, your money is halal, and hereafter you're what? You're in hellfire forever. Look at the importance of it. Asma, the titles you're given, and then the ahkam that follow it, and this is where these people, they fell into this great mistake. The last point he mentions is that Ahlul Sunnah, we don't consider a person to be a kafir by way of falling into a sin. Ahlul Sunnah, they don't consider a person to be a kafir by way of falling into a sin. Now, that chapter, Brother Faisal discussed it in detail in his explanation of Naqd al-Islam. But before we get to that, if a person rejects something which is obligatory, that is known in the religion by way of a darura, necessity, such as the salah, for example, such as zakat, or fasting, or hajj. Example, someone says, I don't believe in the obligation of salah. Every Muslim knows that something called salah, praying, is an obligation in Islam. And he comes to it and he says, I don't believe in the obligation of salah. What is his ruling? It's kufr, he's a kafir. Obviously the rules apply in applying that rule to him, but in a general sense, he's a kafir. Then, the second point is that if he rejects a prohibition which is known by way of the legislation by darura, necessity, then he becomes a kafir by way of that. For example, someone who's born in a Muslim country, he's born in a Muslim household, and he knows zina is haram, and he comes and says zina is not haram. I don't believe in that zina is haram. This is a kafir. But someone who falls into a sin, whether major or minor, as long as he doesn't deem it permissible, he's not a kafir, he's a Muslim. He's not a kafir, he's a Muslim, even if he persists upon it. As long as he doesn't deem it permissible. As long as he doesn't deem it permissible. Ahlul Sunnah, we say that if a person falls into a major sin or a minor sin, his iman decreases, but he doesn't lose iman in totality. He's mu'min bi-imanih wa fasiqun bi-kabiraته. He's a believer with the iman he has, but he's an evildoer with the major sin or the sin that he committed. He's an evildoer with the sin that he committed. But we don't take away from the title of a Muslim or a mu'min. And we believe that if he dies upon that without making tawbah in the hereafter, if Allah wills to punish him, He'll punish him. And if Allah wills to forgive him, He'll forgive him. He's under the will of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Those who oppose them as well, but he'll never remain in the hellfire forever. If he goes into the hellfire, he'll come out of it after. He will never remain there forever. Those who oppose Ahlul Sunnah in this, as we mentioned before, the Khawarij, they say if a person dies like this, he's a kafir in the hellfire forever, and in this dunya, he's a kafir. And the Mu'tazila, as we mentioned earlier. Now, as a benefit, Ibn Abi Zayd Al-Hanafi, he mentions, Ahlul Sunnah all agree that the one who falls into a major sin, he does not disbelieve a disbelief that takes him out of the fold of Islam in totality, as the Khawarij believe. If this was the case, then they would be considered an apostate if they fell into this for committing a sin. But the refutation on that is then that, for example, فَمَنْ عُفِيَ لَهُ مِنْ أَخِيهِ شَيْءٌ, that if a person is pardoned for killing someone, then this pardoning will not be accepted. Allah says in the Quran, if someone kills someone, then he could be forgiven. You could pardon him. If the case was that he kills someone, because سِبَاءُ الْمُسْلِمْ فُسُوقٌ وَقِتَالُهُ كُفْرٌ, cursing a Muslim is evil and fighting him is kufr. But here you're allowed to pardon him for killing him. Killing is a major sin. But that pardoning mentioned in the Quran and mentioned that he's his brother shows that he didn't leave the fold of Islam. He committed a sin. He still has the name of the title of Islam. Also, if the case is that you commit a major sin, that you left the fold of Islam, then what's the point of hudud? What's the point of hudud, the punishments? For example, if zina makes you a kafir, someone commits zina and makes him a kafir, then what's the point of the had? Being lashed 100 times if you weren't married before. For example, someone stole, what's the point of the had of cutting his hand? Someone drinking, what's the point of the had of being lashed? There will be no need for this. For this reason, it says this statement that the one who commits a major sin disbelieves is a statement of falsehood and corruption that is known by necessity from the religion of Islam that it is false and corrupt. And the last point we'll mention is that this affair, this whole chapter of Al-Asma wal-Ahkam, the titles given to people and the rulings that pertain to those titles, and how Ahlul Sunnah believe regarding this chapter, and the chapter of regarding sins, and does it take you out of the fold of Islam or not. That is important for us to understand this chapter. For if you don't understand this chapter, you will give rulings to people that are not deserving of these rulings. فَمَنْ قَالَ لِأَخِيهِ يَا كَافِرْ فَقَدْ بَاءَ بِهَا أَحَدُهُمَا. If you say to your Muslim brother, you're a kafir, it returns to one of the two. It returns to one of the two. The dangers of calling Muslims kuffar, or the dangers of not doing righteous deeds and not praying the salah. الْأَحْدُ الَّذِي بَيْنَنَا وَبَيْنُهُمَا الصَّلَاةُ فَمَنْ تَرَكَهَا فَقَدْ كَفَرَ. The covenant between us and them is a prayer. Whoever leaves off is disbelieved. Both sides have dangers in them. And if we don't understand this chapter correctly, you may fall into the dangers of this side or that side. The right way is al-wasatiyya, the middle path, which is the path of Ahlul Sunnah, not this extreme and not that extreme. وَجَعَلْنَاكُمْ أُمَّةً وَسَطًا. We made you a nation which is adlun khiyar, upright in the middle and the best of ummahs. Ahlul Sunnah is always the middle path between two extremes. We'll stop with this much. If any quick question, we'll take it off now. Continue next week, inshallah.